Great. And so what we were assigned to do is we were to look at the state of the hill country, and we were going to try to look at an 18-county area and understand what we can measure across that landscape, across over 11 million acres, that is meaningful to this group, is meaningful to decision makers, is meaningful to land trust, is meaningful to municipalities. That's a pretty large task. It turns out that during creating the State of the Hill Country report, I know someone that had 2 children and a world pandemic happened. So it's taken us a while to get to this state. It's important to remember that it's a dynamic document. Everything that you all see today, we could all critique. Within the group of people that worked on this, and it's a large group of people, we all have critiques about what could be done better on this, but this is a starting point. It gives us a measurement. It allows us to move forward thinking, how can we change this measurement as we go forward? And as this project evolves, the next time that the Hill Country Conservation Network does it, it'll likely include different metrics, ones that become more relevant to more of you all. So this is your chance to start thinking, what is important to me? Where can I have impact? Where can I tell them how we should measure these things? I'd like to make a couple call-outs really quick. Haley Wagner, who works with us, who makes better maps than me, is not here. She lives in Salt Lake City, and because of COVID, she didn't travel here, but she did a lot of the work on this. John Rooney, who's sitting right up here, gave us marching orders over and over to get this over the finish line. And then Louis Bond, who I'm not sure has made it here yet, has done a great job of bringing together the narrative work. And then a whole lot of other people over a long period of time had made this happen. So this is part of the Hill Country Conservation Network. So John Rooney is the coordinator of the Hill Country Conservation Network, but it is a group of organizations, those in this room, that are coming together to realize that we can do more together than as individuals. And this is one way that we can start thinking about these big ideas, these big numbers, and how we can make a change. So I have 20 minutes to go through all of these, plus 2 case studies. So a little bit of challenge. I'm going to leave out some of the details, but not all of them. But really quick, we're going to go through unincorporated areas, 2 metrics dealing with land, 3 dealing with water, 1 dealing with night skies, which I'm going to touch on briefly, but there's going to be a presentation on it later today, and then investment. Where are we putting our money on the ground? One of my favorite quotes from Jeff Fransell, and I don't have but one quote from Jeff Fransell: if you're talking about conservation and you don't have money, it's just talk. Investment is incredibly important. Community, thinking about unincorporated areas. This is a hard, wonky one to start with, but we have all these communities throughout the Hill Country. Oh my gosh, how'd that happen? Thankfully, time's not up yet. Those areas outside those city limits are those unincorporated areas. And it turns out that that's where a lot of our development is happening. So if you look at Kendall County, right here outside of Bear, right outside of San Antonio, while Bernie has grown 4 times since 1990, the unincorporated area population is 3 times what it was in 1990. If you look at Kimball County, it turns out that the city of Junction since 1990 has actually lost population, but the unincorporated areas make up for that with 34% increase in the population in those areas. And Bandera is the same, where it's neutral in those city limits, but the unincorporated areas are growing substantially. So why does that matter? Well, the reason that people are doing it is because there's lower taxes, the land is cheaper, it's easier to develop, and we think of that country feel. But as we're driving out to Dripping Springs, people used to think about that when they moved out to Dripping Springs, and you can see what's happening just on Fitzhugh Road. What we're seeing is this kind of community creation in unincorporated areas. So that's happening throughout the Hill Country, and it substantially hinders our ability to create community, be efficient with our infrastructure. And I came up with a ludicrous analogy that I haven't tried out on anyone yet, and I apologize, you're going to be the experiment. So it would be as if you asked for a 3-bedroom house to get created on 5 acres. And then the day you went and closed and you visited it, you went to it and you saw your living room is in one place, your 3 bedrooms are in another place, your bathroom is in another place, and your kitchen is in another place. Now, to use that and make it functional, you need to create that conduit. You need to create that electrical lines, you need to create the plumbing, you need to create the hallways to move back and forth. So that's what we're doing to our communities, to our cities, is we're asking them to come back after we've developed in these unincorporated areas and create that tissue of community. It's highly expensive, and it makes it so we can't conserve those lands and we can't use them efficiently. Hayes, Caldwell, Hayes, Comal, Bandera are some of the, Kendall are some of those that are hardest hit by this issue. Jumping on to conservation lands and development lands, this is the yin and yang of how we use land. Those developed areas, they're what we need. They're where we live. They're the buildings we're in, the driveway we're in, the roads we take to get from one area to the other. I'd like to say the mass transit we take to get from one area to another. They're super important. Those conservation lands, it turns out that they supply the ecosystem services we need. Do we know where our water supply comes from? It comes from all of the hill country. No matter who's in here, our water supply is dependent on a vast open space. They provide biodiversity, they provide climate resiliency, and climate adaptation for us. Down here in the bottom right-hand corner, which is hard for you all to see, there's 546,000 acres of land in conservation within the hill country. It turns out that that's pretty high. That's about 5%. Half of that is publicly owned, half of that is privately owned. But it turns out that we have about 828,000 acres in development. I apologize that you all can't see this bottom right-hand corner. That might be problematic. And then we can drop that down per county to look at what's going on there. It turns out that Travis County has the highest level of conservation within this 18-county area. This is permanent conservation. And then Bear has the highest level of development at 38%. So that's where San Antonio is. Travis County is where Austin is. Another interesting one to look at is Uvalde County. It's at 12% conservation, and we'll come back to that idea on another metric. But thinking about these, a challenge for all of us could be to say that we want at least as many acres in permanent conservation as we have in development in each of these counties. And if we wanted to go even further, we could start thinking about the America Beautiful plan that calls for 30% of an area to be in conservation by 2030. A robust goal. Sky Louie is here. Sky helped us with this one, as well as Mateo Scoggins and Chris Harrington, who has unfortunately left the hill country, to my regret. But talking about pristine streams, and Sky helped us understand this. Rob and Geary also worked on this data. Essentially, these are areas that have very low levels of phosphorus in them. And so we tracked, looked at a 10-year period and understand those areas that had very little phosphorus. Within the state, there's about 2,000 waterways that were evaluated. 40 of the ones that are pristine are in the hill are pristine, and 66% of those are in the hill country. So we have this amazingly robust resource that is not actually protected. And I believe there was legislation that was introduced, but it did not make it through the legislature. But I think it's something, again, this group can think about: how do we protect that amazing resource? And then there's also ones that have been degraded. So point source and non-point source pollution we have running throughout our areas. A lot of that comes from wastewater treatment, from runoff from roads, from animals. And when that happens, watershed protection plans get put in place. A number of you all have been involved in these watershed protection plans. This is a way for us to repair, evaluate, and mitigate this resource. Jumping on to how we use water. So thinking about we have this amazing resource throughout our landscape. How are we using it in our dwellings, and what does that mean? And if we use less, do we have more for the environment? And a lot of people are working on those environmental flows and how critical they are. So the largest users. And again, this is in the bottom right-hand corner. This is going to be a stinker, but 783 gallons per day happens in some of these muds near Austin. On average, there's 191 acres per day per capita people use. So that's for when we're turning on our shower, when we're watering our lawn, and the like. So for comparison, City of San Antonio, they use on average about 120 gallons per day. That's about 1.7 bathtubs. Did anybody put water in the bathtub during Snowvid? I did. This made me really think about this graphic. This graphic was created before Snowvid. Some people are using 11 bathtubs per day. If through education, through conservation, is how we're going to conserve a lot of these water resources. A Texas Water Development Board sees 30% of our new water coming from conservation methods. Jumping onto spring flows. Springs are what a lot of us are about. Folks from Great Springs are in the room. A lot of us have dedicated large parts of our careers to working on springs. At the bottom, you have the flows of the major springs, some of the springs throughout the hill country, the Comal Springs, San Marcos Springs, Barton Springs, and Jacob's Well. Jacob's Well is at 3 cubic feet per second. Barton Springs is at 71. These are in the bottom right-hand corner. What's interesting about these is Jacob Well is in the Trinity Aquifer. So the lighter blue area within this map is the Trinity. And those flow at a lower rate, but they're critical because they are the headwaters. And if you talk to so many of the experts in the room here on water resources, you realize that our water falls from the sky. It goes into the ground one place, it comes out in a stream in another. It goes into the ground one place, comes out in a spring in another, and on it goes. So we have this incredibly interconnected web, and those Trinity Springs are important so we get the flow in the Comal Springs, San Marcos Springs, and Barton Springs as well. And these change over time. So you can look at the graph. So you can look at 2011 under drought conditions, and you see a substantial fall in some of those springs. So us being aware of what those springs flows and realize while they seem moderately static to us, Jacob's Well not so much, but the other ones do, they change substantially over time. Us being aware of that, looking at future development scenarios and how they impact those spring flows is critical. Dark skies. This is one we have a presentation on later. What I love about this, I got to work with Bill Neiman on Clearview Alliance for quite a while. He's in the audience as well. What a horrible fight there was to talk about transmission lines coming across the hill country. After that, the next story was night skies, and it was amazing. People from all political spectrums can get behind this. It's something that people are excited about. It's something that we can move forward on. Hill Country Alliance, the Hill Country Conservation Network have done that. What's great, too, is we've got a lot of good night skies. And we have also some excellent, good, and we've got other places we can improve. There's a couple different ways to do this. And Dripping Springs is here, Wimberley is here, thinking about becoming an international night sky community, which they have already done, and other folks can follow suit, and I'm sure you can talk to them about it when you get a chance. I'm thinking about dark sky parks, and then even dark sky development. It's using light efficiently, it makes sense, and it gives us all a better experience. Investment, this is the final one, and then I have 2 case studies, and I'm on 5 minutes, right? Man, I'm making it. So again, we can't do conservation without dollars. Where do those dollars come from? And so if we look here, there's been a major investment along the I-35 corridor. And it turns out, if you look at these 2 arrows going from Bear, they've invested heavily in Medina, Uvalde, Bandera, and Real counties as well. And that's why Uvalde has such a high price tag. And we'll get to that as a case study in a second. I've teased it twice. Hopefully that's set up as you all are going to be excited about it, I can tell. So what does this money amount to? So it amounts to $1.2 billion since 1992 being invested in our conservation lands. This is amazing. This is a huge win. So many people in this room have worked to make this happen, but there's still a lot to do. And I'm sorry to tell you that it turns out that if you look at what that $1.2 billion is, and you look at how we're spending those dollars, Our status quo is about $50 million per year, which again, to me, sounds like a lot of money, but if I'm out there buying land, all of a sudden that does not seem like that much. And we look at our increase in GDP in the same area, it's going to almost $300 billion, where it was at $100 billion starting at around 2000. So our conservation investment has to grow with our GDP so we can be comparable. And for instance, the city of Austin, and we have some city of Austin representatives here, in 1998, they could buy an acre of land for $19,000. When they went back with bond dollars in 2018, they realized it was $60,000. So our ability to purchase is quickly dwindling. Here it is, the case study of San Antonio. These guys, they followed suit with other municipalities. They passed a tax increment increase, and the voters voted it in 3-4 times now, I think. And essentially, they were able, with their partners, to protect over 200,000 of acres in this 1 million acre area. Now, why might they be interested in doing that? Well, it turns out that they're the 7th largest city in the country, and they're one of the largest cities in the world whose primary source of drinking water is groundwater. So they rely on all those spring flows, all that aquifer flow that's coming all the way from Uvalde County and Medina County, across the recharge zone, across the aquifer, to get their water supply. And they understood that, they voted for it, and they voted for it over and over again. One thing to point out on the investment, there's been about 35 voter referendums for investing in conservation. Only one did not pass, and that was in 1993. So we have a high success rate. People want to pay for these open spaces. We need to invest more. City of San Antonio is a great example of that. Second case study, Jacob's Well, thinking again about those Trinity aquifers. This story has a lot of elements associated with it. It's deeply ingrained in the Hill Country Alliance and the Hill Country Conservation Network with Wimberley Valley Watershed Authority Association. David Baker was the champion of that. His superpower is making deals happen when you don't think they have any chance of happening, and they keep on happening and happening. It also turns out that a municipality got involved with Hayes County. They ended up buying the park that we can all go to visit Jacob's Well. And while it has much less of a flow than, say, Comal Springs and Barton Springs, if you looked on Instagram, it might be as big as those other ones as well. It has people coming from all over the world to see this amazing hole, this amazing well in the ground. There's been research. It goes back about a mile. Scuba divers have gone there about a mile mapping it. And it's a public place for people to come. The future, it's expanding. So POSAC, Hayes County dollars for conservation, Wimberley Valley Watershed Association put in a proposal, and it turns out that the canyon right next to there is potentially going to be put into conservation. So that area is growing and growing. It's a great example for us to look at of how we can do conservation in a specific region. And that's it. And I think we have 10 minutes for questions. Yes? Make the first one really easy, please.
Can we get copies of your slides, or where can we find to see those?
Thank you. Yes. Yes. I sure can. Can we get copies of the slides? So Hill Country Conservation Network, Hill Country Alliance will make those available in some way that I don't know about yet. Okay, another easy one, and then a hard one. Someone asked me about unincorporated areas, and then I'll ask someone else in the room. Well, there's other people in the room that know more about it than me, but I can start the process. So I want to mention that counties have done, and I'll maybe even go. Yes, I sure will. Thank you for asking me to do that. Okay. What are the different mechanisms for investing or funding conservation? And so I'm going to focus right now, there's a lot, but I'm going to focus right here on this graph right here to show you what the breakdown is. Hays County and the city of San Marcos have both done bond packages to get funding. I believe San Marcos was the first one to use the Texas Water Development Board revolving fund for conservation land. That is a big deal. There's a couple people in the room that can talk to you about that. Scott Parker is one. Who else in this room would know more about that? That is an amazing asset to us that could change conservation. So that's one that I'll mention for sure. Travis County, the 1993 bond that did not pass was a Travis County referendum, but they've passed, I think, 3 or 4 others, and they're at $244 million. So their investment in conservation is almost as large as the city of Austin. So that's really interesting to see there. And also they're at the highest level of percent conservation within the region. San Antonio is really the one that's driving that. That 579 million, is not just spent in Bexar County, but it's being spent in all those other counties as well. And it's really just this national, statewide model that is changing conservation. It's the bright spot for conservation in Texas, while there's so many other great things going on, but per acre, it's pretty incredible. So generally, there are bonds that are paid back over time. Vanessa, is there anything you want to add to that?
Actually,
In the last regular legislative session, Kyle Biederman's bill dealing with water rights in unincorporated areas got shot down by the developer lobby. Do you have any thoughts about what, they don't meet again until 2023. Do you have any thoughts about what can be done to start getting back the lobbyists in Austin?
I'm so glad Sky is here. So I'm going to repeat the question first. And so Kyle Biederman's legislation did not pass. It was talking about water quality in unincorporated areas. What can be done between now and 2023? Did I capture all that? I was only joking when I put you on the spot, kind of, Sky. If you have any thoughts on that, or if anybody else does, I'd love to hear them. So.
There's really 2 ways to fix the problem. One is the
Here you go, Sky. Here.
what the rulemaking process is. That's all.
Will you repeat it?
could you repeat that?
So I was saying there's really 2 ways to solve the problem. One is through the legislature, and the other is through rulemaking within the TCEQ. And so now we were forced to focus on the rulemaking process in the interim before the next session. And either of those approaches can work. It amounts to having a mass of people like we have in this room today that are willing to call and stand up and write and tell the regulatory authorities what you want to see and how we need to protect these pristine streams.
I'll just add that now is the time to be talking to elected officials and leaders about the importance of protecting our water resources, our land, all the things that Jonathan touched on. So I'm tapping John Rooney, HCA staff and manager of the Hill Country Conservation Network, to run around the room furiously with this microphone. So if y'all could raise your hand and wait until John reaches you, so that not only everyone in the room can hear you, but also the folks that are listening at home. And I think we have time for just a few more questions. I see Sarah over there. Hi, Sarah.
Thanks. The slides you had on the amount of conservation purchases by county were really interesting. I was wondering if you had a chance to look at any of that information kind of by time frame. When did these counties start on their conservation purchases, and based on, development rates and the amount of spread we see, what kind of time frame do we have to make the purchases needed to get where we want to be with those goals you outlined? I mean, what's the level of priority? How much time do we have to move forwards?
That is, I love that question. So this is broken down. This is a spreadsheet that's been consolidated and simplified for this presentation, but it actually has date, who did it, and when, and generally a description of why. So if that's information you want, get in touch with Hill Country Alliance and we can get you that information. And then going back to how do we time this out? And this is something that we like to think about a lot and we all need to think about. So if you're a developer, you're thinking about where am I going to develop in 10 years? Where is the road going? What is going to happen to 281? Where should I be on 281? And where should I do that development? We need to think the same way from a conservation perspective. Where do we need to be allocating resources now? Travis County, who's done a great job at doing conservation. At one time, I got to talk to their natural resources person, and I was asking them how could they reduce the amount of development, reduce the amount of sprawl, and their answer was that they don't have zoning authority, they don't have land use authority. Those are both really true elements, and this was a generation ago, so it's not the people that are there now. But he went on in that presentation to show us how he was spending $117 million on roads to get to those unincorporated areas. So there are purse strings that everybody is pulling on to create the development that we see on the ground. And at that time, he was also talking about a next level creek that was about to be disturbed, and now it has what's called a total maximum daily load study on it. So its pollutant rates are so high that Clean Water Act comes into play, and so there's all kinds of things we need to do. So we need to be thinking about a 40-year time frame. The way we currently develop land, we're going to pay for mitigating problems. And just one example is if you just look at flooding, erosion, and water quality, for a city like Austin, they need to spend $2 billion over the next 40 years to deal with existing issues, not ones that are going to be created tomorrow, not ones that they don't know about yet, but the ones that they know about. So if we take that money and we're thinking on a slow time horizon, where do we need to be putting conservation acquisitions now on the cusp of those red areas that were in that map? A lot of the land trusts are working on that. They need more funding to do that. City of San Antonio had that funding. Us as a coalition of people understanding how we can get more dollars to get more of that area in green now will make a huge difference, because in 20 years, the prices we are showing today will look cheap.
Thank you.
Bill?
Going back to your slide of the disparity from the flatline conservation versus the GDP of the region. And going back, I don't remember how many years, were you in the room at UT, the School of Architecture, when the study was done to try and create an economic survival plan that would address this? And is there any updates you might share of how to get that line moving more properly so that these accomplishments can be made? The UT Hill Country Forum that Hill Country Alliance sponsored is the reference that Bill is making, but Ira Yates calls it a Hill Country Survival Plan, who he's a large advocate for, and clearly Bill does as well. I do know that the Hill Country Conservation Network just released a RFQ for a natural infrastructure plan. And I think one of the goals there is to move towards that. What does that look like? So take the UT student plan and make it more operational, understand how it can better impact policy and programs. Going back to the money question, we actually know some of the ways of doing it. We just can't be afraid of asking for $50 million. The reality is there's money here. There's a lot of money here, and we got to get less afraid. It's not about us asking for it for our house, but realizing there's massive resources here, and more of them need to go to conservation, not because it benefits us, but because it benefits the entire community, and particularly those people that are well off that are moving here for the amenities that are here.